Now, populism is a political phenomenon that has left many investors uncertain of the world's economic direction. However, many economists say the global economy is experiencing a Goldilocks phase. Well, what does that mean? Well, apparently it means it's not too hot and it's not too cold. Joining us from Cape Town is Keith Wade, Chief Economist at Global Investment Manager Schroders, based in the UK. Good to have you in South Africa and on the program. Thanks very, very much for being with us, Keith.
Thank you, thank you.
All right, you got to help me out here. A Goldilocks state? I know the fairy tale. I don't know what that's got to do with the economy. Please give us an explanation.
Right. Yeah, so just to explain that. So we're looking at growth that has picked up quite sharply, and whenever growth does get quite strong, economists become worried that we're going to start seeing a real pickup in inflation. So, you know, people become concerned that growth is too strong or too hot, as you might say. And on the other hand, if growth is weak, then people begin to get worried about deflation. And the key thing at the moment is that the growth that we have in the world economy seems to be just right. So it's a really good combination, particularly for investors, because it means that you can get the earnings growth coming through, you can get the profits coming through, but you don't need to worry so much about inflation picking up and interest rates rising very sharply, because once interest rates start going up, that usually causes investment markets to slow down again. So it's a very good combination for equity markets, for the stock market, for bond markets, and that's why we call it a Goldilocks economy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we can talk about many different markets and different scenarios, but I want to just focus a little bit on South Africa. South Africa, we find ourselves in a very difficult situation. However, I mean, we're seeing our oil share doing exceptionally well. I mean, it has kept on rising, but our GDP is being forecast much lower all the time, and that's very worrying for us as South Africans. What is your analysis of the economy here?
Yeah, so I mean, there's often a bit of a disconnect between the economy and the market. The market's always trying to anticipate what's going to be happening in the future, so it's always looking a little bit beyond the immediate data. But the immediate data doesn't look that great, to be honest, in South Africa. We have seen a slowdown in growth and quite a high rate of inflation, although it does look to us as though South Africa is coming out of a downturn and it's beginning to pick up. And certainly when we look at South Africa from the outside, we do see a currency that's fallen quite a long way and perhaps has fallen a little bit too far. And we also see an economy that has quite high real interest rates, but those interest rates are beginning to come down. So it looks very much to us, if we're looking forward, that South Africa is on the cusp of probably a slightly better phase for economic growth, where it's starting with a competitive currency and has the opportunity for interest rates to come down. So that's something that gets the interest of investors, even though the economy at the moment hasn't quite responded.
Yeah, which is quite an interesting perspective, because I mean, if you have your global ratings agencies looking at South Africa, when they saw the midterm budget, they were very upset with what they heard, and they're on the cusp of downgrading us even further. And yet, what you're saying is that, hang on a second, it actually looks like things may turn around. So it's a little bit confusing, and South Africans are exceptionally worried as to what to do with their investments. Where do we put it? What do we do? Do we run away? Do we stay here? You've seen this obviously happening in other countries before.
Yes, we have. And I think the thing is with the rating agencies, of course, they tend to be very backward looking. So they're taking account of what's happened in the past. Yes, there are some concerns about the fiscal side, so that's something that might need to be addressed. And there is still a risk that the South Africa's credit rating could get downgraded. So there could be some more volatility ahead. But I think, you know, we have seen this in the past in markets, and investors always want to be in at the beginning. So they are looking for that turning point and looking for growth to improve. The other thing to say, of course, is that for the stock market, a lot of the earnings that really matter are actually taking place elsewhere in the world economy. So it might be in Europe or the US or even in China. Those could be the key markets for the South African stock market, which in terms of the important earnings growth. So it's not just about South African GDP, it's about global GDP as well.
Just very quickly, what about Brexit? Because there's also a lot of uncertainty there as well, and obviously this is the UK has invested heavily in South Africa. Are we going to, as a country, see repercussions from Brexit?
Well, it's possible. I mean, the first thing to say is Brexit is still very up in the air. We don't even know in the UK what the sort of deal will be like from Brexit. Well, there's still discussions with the European Union over how much the UK has to pay to leave the EU. There's no agreement on that at the moment. That's something that we're going to see coming through in the next month or so. They then have to sort out the rights of EU citizens in the UK. They also have to sort out the Irish border, which is really a key issue. I guess what I would say that if the UK does succeed in leaving the European Union, trade with countries like South Africa is probably going to actually become more important. So the UK will be looking to do trade deals around the world to replace some of the trade that's possibly going to be lost as a result of leaving the EU. So it is quite possible, actually, from a South African investment perspective, you may actually see more action from the UK coming into regions like this as a result of leaving the EU.
It's impossible to speak about US President Donald Trump in 30 seconds, but I'm going to ask you to do that because we've spoken about China, we've spoken about the UK. What about Trump and Africa?
Well, Donald Trump it seems to us that his popularity is still very, very low. He faces an enormous challenge next year in terms of the midterm elections. We think that he's actually probably going to succeed in getting some tax cuts through in Congress. His foreign policy, though, is very difficult to gauge, and I really wouldn't want to comment on that. But we're very focused on the domestic economy. It looks as though he's probably going to get some stimulus through. The Republican Party seem to be more in agreement with him than they have been for some time. Yeah. And that's really the key thing for investors at the moment. How much can he do in terms of tax cuts for the US?
It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much for your concise analysis of the economy. We've tried to fit in as much as we possibly could with Keith Wade, who is the chief economist at global investment manager Schroders, that's based in the UK, and giving us a little bit of optimistic sights into South Africa's economy, which I have to say is exceptionally refreshing. All right, let's take a break, and Palesa will have our news after this. Stay tuned.